a Hello, welcome to Walk in the Park. My name is Tony Ingram, and this show is recorded on December 11th, 2019, Walk in the Park. You can see all my episodes. You can go to my website, walkinthepark.tv. That is a website, a URL, a domain, and see all of them, over 200 episodes. This is what this one's 228, and we're going to basically be going to Ganondagan State Historic Site, which is northwest of Canandaigua, and this was on September 21st, their annual Living Heritage Day, where they had a lot of people doing things that were like happened at this site. This site is based upon a village that was in the area there, or between actually northwest of Canandaigua, south of Victor, actually near Victor, New York. And we'll zoom in on that Ganondagan State Historic Site. Southeast of Rochester, zoom in a little more closely, your Farmington, your Canandaigua. And back in the 17th century, this was a town of some size. Now it's a state historic site, the only New York State park or historic site dedicated solely to the interpretation of indigenous people. So this is their Cultural Center, Seneca Cultural Center. We'll go inside. This was just come up in recent years. Seneca Art and Culture Center at Ganondagan State Historic Site. This is an amazing place. This was a town. Here's their main exhibit hall. We'll go into that exhibit case right in front of us there. This is a town. Here they're showing the outline of it, of some, I think 5,000 people somewhere, several thousand people, and corn to the horizon, they said. So it was a major corn storage area, a very important town. This is a depiction of what that town might have looked like from the air, with their bark longhouses back in the 1600s. So we're going to go there, and one of the features that they have at the place is this full-scale bark longhouse model that is depicting what life was like in the bark longhouse. You can go in it, and there's a historic site interpreter in there. She is explaining the artifacts they have in there and what life was like at that time, and many other things about Haudenosaunee or Iroquois culture. It's this was a Seneca or Onondaga. I can't get that right. Anyway, people of the Great Hill, which Europeans have called Seneca people, and one of the 6 nations of the Iroquois Confederacy. So there's different names. On September 21st, there was like I said, a Living History Day, and there were various folks from various Haudenosaunee or Iroquois nations that were there in costume. So it was costumed interpretation, I guess you'd call it. And also there was singing, and people could ask a lot of questions and a lot of explanation of the history of the place. And they're also outside. There were demonstrations, and inside the building too, inside the cultural center, there were demonstrations of traditional Iroquois ways of life, including making cornbread from scratch from this corn. And here they're drilling, using a hand drill, this hand drill to drill a shell to make wampum. So there's a lot of different things going on that day. But what I'm going to show you today is a video of a talk given by Peter Jemison, who is the site manager, has been since its beginning back in the 1980s, who is Seneca, and he is a historian, and he is going to tell us about the what happened during the Revolutionary War and afterwards, coming up to what's called the Treaty of Canandaigua. This is the second part of his talk. The first part was in the previous episode, episode 227. So you go to my website and you can find that. So let's listen to Peter Jemison and his talk on, well, I call it from Ganondagan to Canandaigua and the Treaty of Canandaigua. So we'll bring that right up here.
Well, they began to feel that the king was being oppressive to them. The king was demanding of them taxes. The king was demanding of them that they buy whatever it was he exported here. And the king was demanding that they show loyalty. And the king was demanding that if a soldier needed a place to sleep, they should open their house and give him that place. Those were some of the things that they were complaining about. There was a lot more to it. There was the question of if and when they get rid of us, who has the right to claim the land on which we are living? Meaning the Uwehome, meaning the Seneca, Ganondagan, Cayugas. Who had a right to claim that land? So this is part of the whole mix, in my view. Now, so what happens is these people who are living here rise up and say, you know, we're going to throw off the rule of the king. We're going to absolutely get rid of it. And as far as here, his control over us. And they are revolutionaries. Think about that. We're talking about revolutionaries. Today when we talk about revolutionaries, people get all worked up. Okay, these people were revolutionaries. They were getting rid of the king. Now, when this all got sort of going, we'll just say 1775, our first reaction as nations was, leave us out of it. Because this is an argument between cousins. You guys all know each other. You actually come from the same place, many of you. And so, you know, leave us out of the argument. We'll stay over here and we'll remain neutral. Well, that lasted only a certain amount of time because a fight was taking place in our land, right? On our territories, eventually. So we had then English, and I'm going to just say the English are over here, coming to our warriors in particular and saying, join up with us because we have treaties with you that go back far enough that we have been friends a long time and you should really help us out. There was a man, his name was Sir William Johnson. And Sir William Johnson was the representative of the crown, the English crown, to all Native Americans of North America. And then in Sir William Johnson's home, a man lived whose name is Joseph Brant. And Joseph Brant was very loyal to the English crown. He was educated in an Anglican school. So we say he had a white man's education. And as a result of that, he was very partial to the crown. And he really thought, as well, that our people should back the English. Over here on this side, there was a minister by the name of Samuel Kirkland. And he practiced among the Oneidas. And he came to the Oneidas and the Tuscarora who were living among them and said, you know, you should really join up with the American cause because they're going to win, right? They're going to win, and it's a just argument. They're going to fight and win, and you should join up with them. So suddenly, a confederacy of 6 nations, which was united by the message of peace, was being pulled apart by arguments that didn't really involve us directly. I mean, it wasn't us trying to get rid of the king, but it dragged us into it, okay? Are you with me so far? Okay, I know this is getting deeper and deeper here. So then, war breaks out, and at one point there's a battle that takes place called the Battle of Oriskany. And they said to us, why don't you just come and watch? Just come and watch, and you know, you don't have to do anything. And you know, the battle will kind of take place, and you'll be there. And the next thing we knew, we were fighting Seneca, Cayuga, and some Mohawk. We were fighting against the Oneida and the Cayuga. Against the Oneida and the Tuscarora. So we weren't just watching, we were in it. Next thing you know, we're killing one another, right? In this American Revolutionary War. Now, eventually, something happened which absolutely no one expected to happen. The American revolutionaries won. They defeated the English. The English had this amazing navy, right? They were going all over the world, engaged in battles. They had a big army. They had a lot of money. They had a lot of men. And yet, they managed to lose the war to the American revolutionaries. And so now the war is over, So what they decided to do is to sign a treaty of peace. And this treaty of peace is called the Treaty of Paris. Okay, so when this treaty is negotiated, it involves the Americans, it involves the English, but left out of those treaty discussions was the Six Nations. Even though we had been involved, when the treaty got finally negotiated, we're left out of it altogether. Not mentioned at all. So here's what happens next. The next thing that happens is there's a perception that if we were, in any sense, backing the English, and we lost, or the English lost, we lost. And if we lost, therefore Americans could come in and take our land because we were defeated. To the victor goes the spoils, as they say, right? So that meant the next thing that we experienced was people, settlers, coming onto our land and believing that they could take our land even though it hadn't been ceded or sold or anything else, and shooting us if we opposed them on that idea. Shooting our people and killing our people. So we couldn't live with this, really, you know. This is something that was unacceptable. So we began to go to Philadelphia to address then the president, who was George Washington. And we basically said to him, you have to get a hold of your people. Your people are coming onto our land and shooting us like they would go and shoot deer. And, you know, there seems to be no way for us to get any kind of justice out of this. So it's up to you, because you now are the president of this country, you know, and so it's up to you. Now, this was kind of a, you might say, an uphill climb, because George Washington in 1779 directed his army to come through Cayuga territory and Seneca territory in what is called the Sullivan-Clinton campaign, to basically wipe us out, to destroy utterly us, to destroy all of our food sources, to burn our houses to the ground, to cut down the finest apple and peach orchards that they encountered, and to leave us utterly devastated, and to take as many prisoners as they could. And that's what he told his army to do in 1779. So now, here we are talking to him about, you know, hey, why don't you have your guys back off, and why don't we come to some kind of a stop to this war? And so we didn't know how that was going to work out, really. But in the end, he finally chose to send a negotiator to Canandaigua, New York, the city nearest us here, and to negotiate a treaty of peace in the year 1794. And then they invited all of the members of the Six Nations to come there. There was one group that they didn't invite to come, I should put it that way. And this was the Mohawk. A lot of Mohawk people, feeling loyal to Joseph Brant and the English, crossed the Niagara River and went to live up on the Grand River, and they were granted land, which is called the Haldeman Tract. They were given some land up there, so they went up there to live. And so they were still kind of within, you would say, the English sphere, because Canada's still in the hands of the Crown. And so Timothy Pickering, when a Mohawk guy showed up, basically told him he wanted him to leave, because he was afraid he was like a spy on behalf of the English coming to the treaty negotiations. So that one group did not have a lot of representation at this treaty negotiations. The Seneca were in numbers, we were there, big time. And all the rest of our nations came there to listen to this treaty negotiation, and our leaders were there. So Timothy Pickering, he was a pretty interesting guy, because he wrote a letter to George Washington. And what he said was, whatever is said during these negotiations, I want it to be truthful. I don't want any, I'm going to put it this way, shenanigans. So that if there's something that's discussed during the process of making the treaty, what winds up written on the treaty is the same thing that was discussed in negotiations. So there's no double dealing. This is Timothy Pickering writing to George Washington, right? And I saw a copy of the letter, which is in the hands of the Pickering family. I know there are other copies maybe someplace, I don't know. This past spring I was at the home of the Pickerings in Salem, Massachusetts, in a house that was built in 1670, if you can imagine, and it's still a historic site today. At any rate, so Timothy Pickering sits down with us and he's trying to negotiate this treaty. There's a complication that's going on. I'm going to get into this real fast. A complication that's going on is in the West, there's a Western Confederacy which is talking to us, the Six Nations, and it's saying, hey, you know, this war, although it sort of has ended and we haven't got a treaty yet, you should join up with us, this Western Confederacy is saying. And if you did join up with us, meaning your warriors joined up with us, we could push these people right back into the sea. They literally are saying that to us. And we're like, wonder. At the same time, those people had gone to Canada, were saying to us, why don't you come up here and live? Because the king has given us all this land along the Grand River on the Haldeman tract. So there's another option. So we're sitting there weighing three options. Sign a treaty of peace, go to Canada and live along the Grand River, leave our homeland, and join up with the Western Confederacy and push these people back into the sea. Well, unfortunately, the Western Confederacy didn't have the greatest leadership. And at one point, they've got a guy who's nowhere near what Little Turtle was as a leader. He's just not up to the task. And they wind up losing to a dude named Mad Anthony Wayne. Mad Anthony Wayne defeats the Western Confederacy, at Fallen Timbers. And so now, the Western Confederacy has not got the upper hand. We take a look at the Grand River situation, we say, I don't think so. I don't think we want to leave home. I think we want to stay here, in our own territory. And so we decide to really sit down and seriously negotiate with Timothy Pickering. Takes quite a while. But eventually, on November the 11th, 1794, we arrive at an agreement, a treaty. Now, Sonny, I'm going to ask you for some help. Take a hold of one end of this belt. My friend Sonny from the Ganondagan Nation. Okay, this belt was put together by two Oneida women for George Washington. And it was given to us in the year 1792. And the 13 large figures represent the 13 original colonies, right? And then these two smaller figures in the middle, where my hand is, kind of on either side of my hand, they are the keeper of the eastern door of the Mohawk and the keeper of the western door of the Seneca. And then there's kind of a house here beneath my hand. And one is, you might say, it represents the White House, before there ever was one, and it represents our Longhouse as well, these houses here. And what it's basically saying is, George Washington saying, these 13 states are going to look out for you. Look out for the Haudenosaunee. We're going to live in peace and friendship. That's what this belt is trying to say to us. There was a time when we were in conflict, but now we're going to sign a treaty of peace. We're going to negotiate a peace treaty. So this is referred to as the George Washington Belt. The reason we know it came in 1792 is because in 1792 there were 13 states. By 1794, when the treaty is actually signed, there were 15. So this came before the final days of the treaty, but it was George Washington's effort to end this fight that was going on. Thanks. So, now some people probably are wondering, what is a wampum belt actually made out of? A wampum belt is actually made out of two different kinds of shell. One is this lightning welt, from which you get the white beads. Imagine taking this very brittle and hard shell and making it into a bead. And that's what Algonquin-speaking people who lived in what we call Connecticut today were doing. This was harvested in the Atlantic Ocean, traded inland to places like the Pequot, and they fashioned beads, and then the beads were traded to us, and in most cases we were taking those beads and assembling them into belts. The purple part came from the Quahaug clan. Each Quahaug clan shell has a bit of purple, and then that was taken and they made from that a bead. Again, very brittle shell being made into beads, right? And very carefully, of course. Now, one of our older belts, preceding all of that, is this belt, which I refer to as the Haudenosaunee belt, also known as the Hiawatha belt. You can imagine how many clamshells this one took, right? It's all purple, indicating that at the time of this belt, there was a great conflict that had been going on among ourselves. We've been fighting with each other, fighting with each nation, constant warfare, constant sorrow, constant fear of one another. And along came a man called the Peacemaker, who spread a message of peace, power, and righteousness to unite these 5 nations into a confederacy. And the nations that accepted it are represented in white on this belt. You can see them, right? Here they are. In the center, the Ganondagan nation represented by a tree of peace. On either end, keeper of the eastern door, keeper of the western door, keeper of the eastern door, Mohawk, western door, Seneca. And the Cayuga and the Oneida. I'm kind of trying to keep moving here because I'm a lot to talk about. Okay. This painting that I put up was created by a man named Griffin. Mr. Griffin made this painting. And so Mr. Griffin got us together, many of us from the Six Nations, and he had us dress up in outfits of the time period, and he did a lot of photographs of us, and then he created this painting of the day that the treaty was signed. And sitting here is Timothy Pickering, and other representatives of the U.S. Are sitting there as well that came here. One of them was a guy named William Savory. William Savory was a Quaker, and he kept a journal, he kept a diary, and William Savory wrote down everything that he saw. And that is one of the ways that we know what went on at the Canandaigua Treaty when it was negotiated. And this guy here is actually to depict Red Jacket, who evidently had more than one jacket. And that's me. I am posing for this painting. And I know I've got a hair there. What happened? Well, I was wearing a prosthesis, okay, to tell you the truth. But nevertheless, so this is a depiction. It was only done about 5 years ago, but it's a painting that was commissioned by Danny and Stenzi Wegman for their home. And so that's where the original hangs, but they produced a lot of prints for sale. And so this is a copy of that particular painting of the day the Canandaigua Treaty was signed. So what I'm getting at is this. This year is the 225th anniversary of this treaty, which means that on November the 11th, we are going to be on the lawn of the Ontario County Courthouse at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, marking the anniversary of this treaty. Now, I want to say this much. Is the Canandaigua Treaty still in place?
Yes.
This, my friends, is treaty cloth. Every year, the United States government ships us bolts of cloth, and this is mine. This is my treaty cloth. I'm going to say it's from a year ago. I get 1 yard of this. I don't know what I'm going to use it for, but it isn't the point. The point is, the United States government is still shipping us this treaty cloth because they set aside $4,500 in 1794 to provide for us. And they've been shipping it ever since for the same $4,500. Okay? So at least this much is true. Treaty cloth is still coming every year. So somebody, and I found out who's shipping it. One day I was speaking to a group of members from the Army Corps of Engineers, and a guy in the back of the room raised his hand. He said, "I'm so glad you're getting that because I'm the guy that makes the arrangements to ship it." The irony of that, if you can stand with me a little bit longer, the irony of that is the Army Corps of Engineers is the same group that flooded 10,000 acres of Seneca land in 1965. Because they refused to look at an alternative which would have protected our land. My dancers are really trying to get in here. I'm wrapping up. Come on in. Come on in. Okay, this is for you too. So, in other words, if this is true, they're still sending us treaty cloth, and if we are still, acknowledging this every November the 11th, there must be something to it, right? This treaty was signed by George Washington and ratified by the Congress in 1795. So again, it's pretty good. No, I mean, it's a pretty good document. So we still continue to commemorate that. Okay, the last point I want to make about this Canandaigua Treaty is you see everything inside of the blue tape, everything inside of the blue tape, it goes from the Genesee River all the way to Erie, Pennsylvania. All of this land was guaranteed to the Seneca by the Canandaigua Treaty of 1794. All that land, from west of the Genesee to Erie, Pennsylvania, was guaranteed to us by the Canandaigua Treaty. There's a mind blower. Okay, so what have we got left today? What is still in our hands? Do you see those smaller orange shapes on the map here? Okay, that's what we have left today. That belongs to us. Okay, I come from the Cattaraugus Reservation, which is right here. Here's the Allegheny Reservation, which was flooded and lost 10,000 acres. And here's Oil Springs, which is part of the Seneca Nation of Indians. And then the last one is up here, Tonawanda. Tonawanda has a tribal chieftain form of government, but they are also Senecas. Ours is an elective system of government. We elect our president, our treasurer, our clerk, our court, and our councilors. But anyway, so you see, there's a lot on the table here, right? And I'm sure a lot of it. A kid came up to me and he said, "Are you planning to claim all that land?" I said, "Well, I don't think we're going to get very far if we do this. But what we would like to make sure happens is that we hang on to the land we have left. Because where are my children's children going to put their feet? Where are my children's children? You know, I'm hanging on to this for them. I'm only borrowing it temporarily right now while I'm here on this earth."
Okay, that's all we have time for. That's the end of the show. And thank you for joining me, and we'll see you again soon. We'll put up our final goodbye clip here. Is a